Tim, part of the problem.
Well, I don't want to thwart the thrust of what we're trying to do because, again, would like to also address all of you. Sorry for not standing up. Stand up and respect. But, the beauty of what you're doing is it forces this conversation that is long overdue, forces the conversation, and it's a conversation I think all 9 of us openly embrace. And so we, again, thank you for your leadership. And I want to talk about solutions because that's one of the things perhaps in the movement that, we will get labeled as we're all anarchists, right? We don't like any part of democracy. And as the leadership, and I try to always think about what we can do as a city council, and particularly in this foreclosure process and in the educational piece of what we're doing, we can show some real leadership here. So I'm sort of sorry to see that language get watered down because spending a lot of resources just gathering data, I don't think that's the best use of resources.
Well, let me just respond to say that it's our decision to move forward and demand solutions. So that is still within our authority.
I understand that, but a resolution, in my opinion, and quite frankly, I think this version was developed Thursday, and we were shut down Friday. So I just didn't get a lot of chance to see this. And so when I was reading it today, I'd rather have the resolution articulate the language requiring Office of Housing to come up with solutions on a foreclosure piece.
On this issue? Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Licata, for having brought this forth. As you have said, and other council members as well, we've all worked to make sure that this resolution accurately reflects our views and the actions that we'll take. The area that I focused on was the language relating to home foreclosure, and I'll tell you the first experience I had working with a constituent when I was first elected to office. An elderly woman who I met out on the campaign trail, this was 8 years ago, contacted me shortly after I was sworn in. She lived in the central area, African-American woman who had been a school teacher, and she was being evicted from her home because of predatory lending. And I tried to intervene. I contacted the bank and asked them if they would give her more time to see if she could get the financial means that she needed in order to avoid the foreclosure. And they turned me down. No matter how high I went, they continually turned me down, and they didn't give me any more time. We were out of time. And they foreclosed on her, and that bank was Washington Mutual. I know that she lost her home, and she had to move in with children in Federal Way, even though she had lived in the central area most of her life. I think we need to know more about what's going on in our city with regard to home foreclosures and who's doing it and why and how those loans got so high. So people go underwater. And that will influence our decisions later on in terms of who we work with and who we invest with our city funds. I was recently at a human service providers event, and we were recognizing people who have done wonderful work in our community. And they're really overwhelmed with what they see in terms of the food banks and other services that are needed. And one man who spoke said something that was very chilling. He said, because of all the cuts at the state level particularly, our cities are going to be swimming in the poor. And I think that we're seeing that now. And we're hearing that from you as well, what you're seeing on the streets. I think also several of you have recognized that the city is suffering too, and you're going to see it in the maintenance of our parks and the conditions of our roads and the services that we provide. So while the demonstrations continue and the occupation continues, I would ask that you help us keep the peace and help keep our city clean. One more thing too. One of the speakers said that we look tired or pressed. We're getting tired of this. And no, I would say, no, we're motivated. We said that we're going to take action, and we will. And this resolution sets the course for that. So thank you very much for being here.
Two things. I wanted to come back to section, item number 2 in section 1. And I wanted to be clear, I don't think that what the Office of Housing's suggested language is doing is trying to pull back, because I know a number of us have been involved with the ongoing work that Office of Housing staff is doing with nonprofit partners, doing regular meetings out in the community, reaching out, actually doing the analysis of people's debt and their foreclosure issues in the community. And so the last one I attended was out at the Rainier Community Center. There was one down in foreclosure prevention. There was a weekend in White Center either last weekend or the weekend before. So City of Seattle is very engaged with this, trying to work with community partners directly. I think what Office of Housing was suggesting by saying, hey, can we use this language, is that they need a directive from us to really understand where the problem is now. They, I think, really want the directive to gather the data, have much better, very specific on-the-ground data to provide to us so that we can figure out what is that next step. So I don't think they're trying to pull back. I think they're trying to tell us, you guys are going to ask us to do things and we don't have the data for it. So let's get the data and then tell us, absolutely, let's work together on the plan for it. But I don't believe, and I don't believe that it's the council's intention in any way to step back from the great work that's been happening the past couple of years in very difficult circumstances. Overall, I'll echo the thanks to Councilmember Licata for getting the ball rolling with the resolution, and it has been quite the team effort of trying to cobble together language that addresses everybody's priorities. So there are a lot of pieces in here that people care very deeply about, and we also want to make sure that the council sets out a real work plan, that we actually work on this with you and with other interested folks over the course of this year and see where we can make a difference, where we can make real progress. And so many of you have already alluded to the fact that so much of this so much of what we're experiencing will be borne by cities in ways that other levels of government can't deal with. So when the feds are cutting, when the state is cutting, when the county is cutting, it is coming down to cities to deal with how do you maintain a park, how do you pay the bills, how do you make sure the water is clean when it comes out of the tap, how do you have a great place for people to live and work and not just survive but thrive. And that's going to be a real challenge for cities as we bear the brunt of everything that's coming at us from these cuts in other levels of government and from other providers who, because of where we are with the economy, because of where we are with people who built the rules and then completely misused the rules, we all now end up with the very real circumstances on the street of what that means in people's lives. And many of you have spoken very eloquently about that. We all have a role to play going forward. So for the next year, we get to look at what we've laid out here and try to get very specific and try to make a real difference with the city's ability to act and where we can push on other actors to maybe make some more space for us in banking regulation, in foreclosure review. And it's up to you to do a couple of different things as well. There is the constant sort of tension of, will it remain peaceful? Will it not be peaceful? The longer it remains peaceful, the longer we stay focused on these issues and don't get into fights about who's stockpiling rocks or whatever it was that Portland was talking about. But in order to keep the heat on and in order to stay visible and in order to stay relevant, we all have to continue to play that role. And we have the role to play also as the civil authority and how to make sure that that's carried out responsibly as well. That means we also need to stay engaged for next year. 2012 is a state and federal election year. There's a lot to do for next year. There's a lot to do, and there's a lot to get people motivated and engaged about for next year. And that's not something we get to talk about here, but it's something that many folks in Occupy are talking about. What does this mean for 2012? Thank you for taking your outrage and your passion into a public place. For a lot of people, this has been overwhelming for so long. For a lot of us, it's overwhelming to think about, well, what do you do about big banks? And people have found something very specific to do. And I'm one of those people also where I want to get to the fix really quickly, and so I'm one of those bad people pressing you to say, yeah, but what now? And you get to say that back to me too. What now? What'd you guys get done? And we'll keep kind of throwing that back and forth. What now? Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you very, very much to everyone who worked on this, and it really is true that all 9 of us did. And believe me, all of us who care very much about words spend a lot of time thinking through those words. And I know that you all who have been part of this movement have had similar experiences. But think about having 9 people working on a single resolution with all of our thoughts enclosed. And I must say, I want to thank especially Councilmember Licata and Councilmember Burgess who are the ones who did the main wordsmithing on it, but we all did. I added a part about the people that this recession has taken its hardest toll on women and people of color, and that we must be especially concerned about the social justice involved in this. What this really is, when you look at it, is a work plan. And I know it's not something we're going to accomplish tomorrow, but I know that we're all going to be working on it, and we're going to stay with it, and we ask you also to stay with it. Thank you.
Councilmember Licata, thank you for participating with us and being gracious and allowing us to work with you on your resolution. So I'm not one who has ever been out in the street protesting. Thank you. I know I'm welcome if I want to. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, I was a journalist here in Seattle covering the civil rights movement, anti-war movement. My wife, however, of 34 years, has been out in the street several times. But I left my job as a journalist and became a Seattle police officer, so I clearly took another path. But when Occupy Wall Street started, and when it started here in Seattle, and I started reading and becoming more aware of the issues that you were all raising, I realized that there is this fundamental undercurrent in America today of discontent, that something is clearly wrong. This gap, the income gap between the wealthiest and the poorest, the concentration of wealth in a very small number of people, no matter your political persuasion, no matter whether you're making minimum wage or making millions of dollars a year, that is not a good economic structure to have in our city. It harms all of us up and down the economic ladder. But in addition to the economic undercurrent of discontent, I think we face a very strong political and ethical discontent in our country today. I watched 60 Minutes last night and learned that if the report is true on 60 Minutes, they usually do a pretty good job, that all of the insider trading laws that apply to all of you and apply to us don't apply to members of Congress. And what a surprise. And when you look at what's happening in Washington, D.C., and the role of money and corporate money, when you look at the gridlock and the extreme partisanship and debate, nothing like we experience here, way, way more extreme. That creates discontent in our country, and that's not good for our democracy. And when you look at Washington, D.C., in many ways, it's a form of bribery that's been washed and sanitized and packaged just so that it's barely legal. And that damages our country and our democracy. This resolution also says some things that Councilmember Clark just referred to, and that is that as the civil authorities of our city with the mayor, we're responsible for protecting the First Amendment rights of all of our citizens, whether it's people protesting or people wanting to get to their jobs. And it's our job to make sure that the city is safe and we're protecting everyone's rights, not just the rights of protesters. And I know that you, at a fundamental level, all agree with that. And so our job is to make sure that we thread the needle correctly so that we're hearing protests, including our own, while at the same time we're protecting the rights of all of our citizens to go about their jobs and their tasks freely and fairly in our city. So I think this is a great first step for us to be taking and to align ourselves with those who believe in justice for all people. And that means that if someone can invest and be successful in business, that's great. And it also means protecting those who are at the lower end of the economic ladder in our country.
Actually, I think everyone has spoken quite well on this, and so I will not add it.
Thank you. Okay,
All those in favor of approving the resolution as version 12 as presented today, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. The resolution is adopted and the chair will sign it.